to use all of our equipment, our grinders and everything, you're going to need to be wearing your gloves, and you'll need eye protection whenever you're grinding or sawing or using frit. You need these glasses, which you can get online, or if you've got prescription glasses, you can wear those as well. You just need something between your face, your eyes, and the glass. All right, each of these have a pretty similar setup where they need water to be making contact with our grinder bit. So I'm going to add water. There should also be a sponge. I'm going to pour it over the sponge so it also gets hydrated. And I'm filling it up to where there's a little line in here that the water goes to. And I know that won't overflow there. If you put too much, it will start to overflow outside the back. So if you see a puddle of water, that's why. Then I've got my little sponge in here. I'm making sure that the sponge is making contact with the water and with my grinder bit, because that's what I want, is the water to be constantly coming in contact with my grinder bit. All right. Alright, so it's on, and you can mark on your glass where it is you're trying to grind. You want to try and cut off as much as possible so you're not sitting here grinding for days and days and days. It shouldn't be a huge chunk of glass you're trying to grind away. It's just these little edges that are hard to nip or cut when you want something rounded. Okay. And it's always a good idea to have two hands on your glass, right? So you have the most control. And you want to go slow. Now the water in the sponge here is keeping any glass dust that's being ground off from going up into the air and having you breathe it in, which would be a bad thing. So you want to always make sure this is making contact. And you don't want to push it harder than it will, faster than it will grind. Otherwise, it'll start to heat up and you'll run into some issues. You also see I move back and forth, because if I just stay in one spot, you're going to end up with a bit of a flat edge. So if I want this rounded, I need to go with my curve. And we have 3 bits like this. This is this higher grit of them all. The lower grit is the one in the middle, and that one will take off a lot more glass in one go if you've got a really chunky bit. But each of them work just fine for grinding. You'll notice that this one also has a little bit up top here. This is for getting into small corners. And to be able to use this one, you actually have to use 2 hands, where you pick up your sponge, which has a lot of water in it, and you're gonna hold it in the back here. Let's see if you can see that. And then I can take my glass, whatever it is I need. So for this one, I'm trying to smooth out this little corner right here. That little bit makes that possible, because I can't get in there over here without grinding all of my little top there off. There you go. All right, some special features that you should know about this grinder. It has the same grinder bit on the top here that you can use to grind different shapes of glass, but it also has this disc at the bottom here, which is good for evening out edges. To use that part, you want to make sure, first of all, that you've got water in the top here, and it can be filled just about to that line there. And then there's this little plug here that you want to take out. It might be a little stiff, it's okay. Put that aside, and that's going to let water drip onto our grinder down here. Remember, we always want water because it's cooling down our bit so it doesn't overheat, and it's lessening the friction, and it's also preventing all that glass dust from going up into the air and you breathing it in. All right, you should have a sponge underneath here. It has a little outlet for the water. Once it falls down here, it'll come out this little spout, and you want to catch it with a sponge or towel. Might spit a little bit. All right, and to get that straight edge, so I've got this kind of curved piece here, and I want to straighten that edge because I want it to match more nicely with another piece of glass. To get that straight edge, I'm going to hold it up against here to keep it at 90 degrees with the cylinder there. Alright, and I just want to, for this one, I want to just lean on one side to try and straighten that out. And I'm moving back and forth to make sure I'm making it even. Precautions for using the saw. Again, we're using our protective eyewear or prescription glasses. You've got your gloves on. We want to make sure there's going to be water in here high enough that it's going to make contact with the saw blade as it rotates. So I'm going to fill it up with some water. There's a fill line just over here. You can see that. All right. Got our water in there. Replace the top. All right, and it's a good idea to mark on your glass the path that you want to take. This saw is really good for doing crazy shapes that you can't normally break out of the glass. So if you're trying to do some weird spirals, maybe for the mosaic, or some irregular shapes that you're going to be fusing, this is the tool that you want to use. Once you've drawn with your Sharpie on the glass, I would let it dry for a little while. If you immediately go to your saw, sometimes the Sharpie will chip off, and I find if I let it dry for like 5 minutes or so, it's less likely to do that. This is going to be loud in a second, so there will be water pouring down and dripping onto the glass, which is what you want to happen. Excuse me. Which is what you want, because that water is, again, keeping the saw blade from overheating and washing away all of that grinder or that glass dust that's being ground away. Because the saw, it isn't cutting, it's grinding through the glass. And I only want to push as fast as the glass will get ground away. If I push really hard, then it's going to break our saw blade. This is an expensive saw blade, and we only get one once in a while. So let's keep it nice and whole. So here, as I'm cutting, it's creating a curve. The saw, again, is only grinding away at this point where it's coming into contact. So I want to always be pushing my glass forward and just turning it to the angle that I want it to cut. I can't shift from side to side like this. It won't cut properly, and it'll break the saw blade. For this one, I can just back it out. And then that's a really good shape for your glass mosaics. If you're using anything that you've sawed or ground, in Fusion, you have to remember that you need to scrub all those edges that have been ground. Some of that glass dust gets pushed back into the porous edges that you've ground away, and those can come up after a full fusion as fog, and you'll see the line where you had cut. So it's a good idea to take an old toothbrush and just some soap and water and scrub all those little edges that you've been grinding. Last but not least, we've got our belt sander, which to set up, we've got a big sponge to cool our belt sander, which we stick under here, and we want to make sure it's making contact with the belt. I'm going to fill it up with water just to the edge of this little purple ledge here to make sure that the water is making enough contact with the sponge and that sponge is making contact with the belt. There's a red button on the side there where my right hand is, and it's going to spit at you. It's going to rain a little bit, so if you want to bring your raincoat, that's alright. Alright, so good idea to have a towel because it's going to be spitting at you. I probably put a little bit too much water in this, but I'm just going to make it work. So just like all of our other grinders, you want to go at it slow. And this one has a little shelf that you can sit your piece on as you're working to keep your edge at the same angle. You can also adjust the little shelf if you need, if you're trying to make a different angle, but usually we're just trying to grind down an edge. So this piece here, I had a little extra hanging off, which was more than I wanted to take to our smaller grinders and less than what I could cut off with the saw. So I'm just trying to even out all my edges and make this piece fit a little better on my mold. And depending on whether you plan on firing this again, you might want to either grind all your sides so they match, because then if you're not going to fire it, then you can just use the diamond pads to smooth it out and make it a little bit shinier and less gritty, or you can put it to a tack fuse, and then you can maintain that edge if you really like a sharp edge. For this one, I'm just going to be full fusing it again, but I want to make sure that I've got all my little rough bits. Since I kind of tiled my clear on here, everything's just a little bit wobbly, and I decided I would just even it all out. The other thing is take your time. If you start seeing streaks on the belt sander, that is glass dust accumulating. It's dry. So if it's really pale on the grinder or the belt, you want to slow down and make sure that there's water making contact with the belt sander. You see mine's still dripping. I'm making little puddles. It's okay. I'm also wearing gloves. This is another tool that we're wearing gloves with. And it's just as easy to work with. No trouble at all. Once you're done, make sure to clean up all your puddles. You can leave water in the reservoir, but make sure to move the sponge out from under the belt, because if that stays in contact with water and stays sopping wet all the time, then it's going to degrade a lot faster, and we want to preserve our equipment as best as possible, please. That's how you use the belt sander. This one has little switches on the side over here. It helps if it's plugged in. Yay! Alright. And this one has buttons on this side of it. Button. Found it. Also good if that's plugged in. My goodness, Sarah. Cut, recut. Alright, plugged in. Need a little bit more water. It's okay, I cut. And now it's back on. Getting my things. Rearranging.
Yeah, I found when I was here last time.
It's okay.